Hello and welcome to this presentation about the purpose of safeguarding scenarios to describe what actually happens and the advantages for individuals and organisations. Safeguarding Scenarios is a new startup company, and because the directors have got a background in education, that's where we're focusing initially, although we're convinced that there are applications to many other settings. Because of this, we're actively seeking to engage with partners to construct scenarios that are culturally appropriate and have benefit to them in their particular setting. We want to help you to build a culture of safeguarding that has even greater compassion, helps staff to become more professionally curious, ensures compliance with the statutory expectations of your setting and their policy, and enables people to have more confidence in all aspects of safeguarding. Most professionals, certainly all of us in education, will have sat through a PowerPoint presentation which was possibly read to us, and although we know that safeguarding is essential, few of us found it riveting. And what should be a purposeful and engaging reflection on something that underpins learning, all too frequently, it's one of those things we have to put up with. Sadly, and far more seriously, in every educational setting where something appalling has happened, there are probably staff who sign to say that they've read, understood, and will fully comply and implement the safeguarding policy. This really cannot continue. We've all had training, but then we forget. If you're a safeguarding lead, you're likely to be fully immersed in many of the challenges that your students and possibly your staff will be facing. But we know that people forget what they've been told, and the longer time goes on after a training session, the more likely we are to forget much of what we've been told. Now, I don't want to get too bogged down in the statistics, but the point is that however good your staff briefing is at the start of the academic year, if their learning hasn't been refreshed, your colleagues will probably have forgotten most of what they've been taught fairly soon afterwards. So the aim of safeguarding scenarios is to stimulate our thinking and provoke conversations and encourage you and your colleagues to talk about safeguarding in greater depth and detail than perhaps you already do. Safeguarding Scenarios asks staff to respond to a short, multiple-choice questionnaire. The scenarios only take a minute or two to complete, and the safeguarding lead will then receive the data from all the respondents to help identify the differing views of participants and consequently identify some training needs. The scenarios are not trying to catch anybody out, but will help to create a safe space for people to reflect on the most appropriate responses and discuss why some people might have different views. Safeguarding Scenarios provides the safeguarding lead with access to a library of scenarios from which they can select scenarios which are appropriate for their setting. To help them identify an appropriate scenario, they can search by topic and then hit Filter to show the scenarios available under that heading. New scenarios being added almost every day, but if you've got suggestions for scenarios that haven't yet been addressed, please do let us know. To help you decide whether a particular scenario is appropriate for your staff, you can also view the questions, in which case a pop-up like this appears. And then you can also see the questions that staff will be asked, so you can view the answers so that you know the questions that colleagues will be responding to. The same view also points you towards similar scenarios where perhaps the gender or ethnicity of the pupils has been changed. You can use these similar scenarios as sort of test and retest if you've done some CPD about a particular topic. Or, of course, you could send half the staff a scenario involving a boy, and the other half could have a very similar scenario about a girl and see if there's any difference in the way that staff respond. So once the safeguarding lead has decided which scenario is most appropriate for their setting at the time, they can then schedule the scenario. And this can happen in one of two ways. The safeguarding lead could schedule a scenario and ask colleagues to complete it, say, by next Thursday. Or they could invite staff to a meeting, in which case they could send out the scenario to everybody who's at the meeting, ask them to reply, and then in real time they'll get feedback for a whole staff discussion. However you choose to do this, once you've registered all your staff, they can all then receive the scenarios that the safeguarding lead chooses to send them. From the perspective of a member of staff who may be a teacher, but also might be a classroom assistant, a member of the administration team, or even the site manager, when they receive the email link, they can see all the scenarios in the library. This enables them to make suggestions for scenarios that might be useful to them or their colleagues, or they might make suggestions for scenarios that haven't yet been written, but they know will be particularly pertinent to them or your setting. When they're ready to complete the scenario, they just look at the scheduled scenarios and then they're ready to respond. When the participating staff look at the scheduled scenarios, whether that's on a phone or a computer or their laptop, they can then click on Start to give the safeguarding leads their thoughts on how they could, or perhaps should, respond to the scenario. The scenarios are designed that all possible responses are reasonable, but some will be better than others. Here's an example of the first question for this particular scenario. What would your preferred response be? You can only click on one answer, and then when you're ready, move on to the next question. Once a participant has finished all the questions, they receive an email acknowledgement, and the safeguarding lead can then decide what they're going to do as a result of the feedback from all the participants. As soon as the staff start to respond, the safeguarding lead can then click on the submissions and see the responses that different staff are giving. The pie charts tell them who has responded and what they've said in response to each question. Sometimes every member of staff might agree on a particular answer, although there's still the possibility that they've all chosen an option that you feel is not necessarily the best. More likely, staff will disagree, and this gives the safeguarding lead an opportunity to plan some targeted training. Safeguarding Scenarios doesn't offer training, but we do have a list of recommended providers should you wish. Where people have disagreed strongly in their choices, it enables the safeguarding lead to organise some appropriate training for all or perhaps some of the staff. The safeguarding lead can also compare responses from colleagues from different levels of seniority, by gender or perhaps by length of time that they've worked in the setting. All of the scenarios ask staff how familiar they are with the setting's policy, which might be important to inform your planning, and we also ask them whether they'd like some additional training around this sort of scenario, which the safeguarding lead can take into consideration when they're planning the next staff development session. In the UK, the TES Safeguarding Report of 2025 suggests that almost 1 in 5 educators say that their safeguarding training is inadequate, and a third said that the safeguarding training needs to be improved. So, Safeguarding Scenarios uses real-life situations to stimulate staff thinking, and the short, thought-provoking scenarios are designed to promote discussion and encourage colleagues to think even more critically about their responses to safeguarding issues. Research evidence suggests that scenario-based learning helps to keep ideas fresh in our minds, and it helps to make staff more compassionate, compliant, professionally curious, and perhaps confident in their decision making. Safeguarding Scenarios has benefits to all staff members, the safeguarding lead and the organisation. For members of staff, we'll hope it will build their confidence, their competence, and as I said, their professional curiosity. For the safeguarding lead, it provides opportunities for training and ongoing staff development. The feedback data provides evidence of knowledge gains and of professional growth, and this means that for the organisation, improvements in efficiency, compliance, and then the performance metrics help to build a culture of safeguarding, because the safeguarding lead can be more confident that the staff will be able to address concerns earlier and, as a result of the discussion, make better judgment rather than just recording safeguarding incidents. Safeguarding Scenarios works upstream to prevent and reduce the number of safeguarding occurrences. Safeguarding Scenarios continues to evolve, and if you've got any thoughts or comments about how we could improve the scenarios or the service we provide to schools or other settings, please do get in touch. Everyone deserves to live safely, which is why safeguarding is at the heart of everything we do. Thank you.